Hey Lake Point, Pastor Michael here to get you caught up on the 5th week of our series, The Upside Down Kingdom. In this series, we're exploring what scholars refer to as the antithesis portion of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. This week, we looked at what Jesus teaches on oath keeping. So allow me to recite the words of Jesus starting in Matthew chapter 5, verse 33, and then we'll unpack them. Jesus says, "Again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'Do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made.' But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one." Now, the Hebrew word for a vow is the word neder, and essentially a vow was a sacred commitment made directly to God, often in times of desperation or devotion. It wasn't a casual thing. It was saying something like, "God, if you do this, I will respond by doing that." It's a conditional commitment, a spiritual deal. It's kind of like the modern day equivalent of praying, "God, if you give me favor with this police officer, I promise to start reading my Bible." Now, here's the thing. Vows were voluntary, but once made, they were meant to be binding. You weren't obligated to make one, but if you did, you were supposed to keep it. It was a big deal. An oath, on the other hand, was also a big deal, and it comes from the Hebrew word shavua. And an oath was a sworn promise between humans, often invoking God as a witness. It's like saying, "As God is my witness, I'll pay back the money I owe you." But here's the danger of swearing an oath. If you don't pay back the money, you disgrace the name of God. Now, I recognize many people throw God's name around willy-nilly in our culture. I mean, many people use Jesus' name as a swear word. But I want you to picture a culture where promising something by the name of God is a big deal. It means something. It's significant. It legitimizes a claim. It was real leverage in the ancient world. People would bring in God's name to lend weight to their words. Now, fast forward to Jesus' day, and culture had evolved. How? Well, people no longer spoke God's name out loud. Why? Because they held God's name in such high reverence. And so what did they do? They began swearing by other sacred things, by heaven, by Jerusalem, by the temple. They didn't want to make a promise using God's name, and so they started making promises using things associated with God's name. And it quickly became a loophole of sorts that people would exploit to manipulate others. In fact, later on in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus tackles this issue head on, and it's a very similar teaching to what we read in the Sermon on the Mount. You can read about it in Matthew chapter 23, verses 16 to 22. And here's what Jesus is communicating to the Pharisees in that passage. He's essentially telling them, stop playing games. When swearing an oath, stop substituting other things in for God as if it changes what you're doing or the legitimacy of your promise. When you swear by the altar or the temple, we all know those are God-adjacent things. We all know they're placeholders for his name. To swear by the temple or the altar is in effect to invoke God, whether you admit it or not. So stop doing it. Stop manipulating people. Stop creating systems where you can make your words seem more impressive or more reliable without being truly accountable for it. See, it's all silliness, it's all games, it's all manipulation to take advantage of others. And so Jesus is over it. Now, what's his advice though? Well, in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, don't swear an oath at all by things like heaven or the earth or Jerusalem or even your own head, because they've all been created and sustained by me. He says, so instead, all you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. Jesus is talking about living with a kind of radical and unheard of integrity. His difficult to live out teaching is be someone who others can actually trust. Be someone whose yes or no is enough. The brilliant theologian Dallas Willard, he writes this. He says, Jesus goes right to the heart of why people swear oaths. He knew that they do it to impress others with their sincerity and their reliability, and thus gain acceptance of what they're saying and what they want. It is a method for getting their way. It's manipulation, or as we say in our culture, spin. And Jesus says it's evil. Instead of loving and honoring others with truthfulness, the intent is to get one's way by verbal manipulation of the thoughts and choices of others. It's pretty heavy, right? Now, I realize outside of marriage vows and courtrooms where you take an oath to tell the truth, which I hope you're not doing either of those things very often, we don't really have an oath-making culture like Jesus' first century audience. But if the heart of Jesus' teaching is about trustworthiness, if it's about integrity, if it's about not using our words to manipulate and control other people, the obvious question is, what would Jesus want to confront in our behavior? In what ways do we manipulate other people's perception of us or get them to do what we want that isn't honoring of them or of God? Well, here's 6 common ones that I could think of. And the first is guilt tripping. It's when you say to people things like, after all I've done for you, this is how you treat me. And what it's doing is leveraging someone's sense of indebtedness to coerce a desired outcome. Instead of having an open conversation or simply asking for what we want, we tie our request to a past favor, implying that they owe us compliance. It's using emotional pressure to get our way. The second is gaslighting, and it represents the denial of facts or the twisting of the truth to make someone question their memory, their perception, or even their sanity. "That never happened," or "you're too sensitive" are common exclamations when gaslighting someone. Instead of being truthful, we distort reality to avoid responsibility or to simply win an argument. The third kind of common manipulation tactic is passive aggressiveness. It's using sarcasm or the silent treatment or a backhanded compliment. Rather than clearly saying, "I'm hurt," we drop sarcastic hints or we withdraw emotionally. The fourth is withholding information. It's telling only part of the truth to influence decisions or to avoid responsibility. It's less about outright lying and it's more about curating the truth. The fifth is name dropping. It's when we claim things like, "Well, so-and-so agrees with me," or "so-and-so said this." We do it in an attempt to add weight to the point we're making. And sometimes we even entirely fabricate the existence of those we're claiming agree with us. And we say things like, "Well, lots of people have said this to me," when the reality is, no one has. It's name dropping to convince another person of the rightness of our position or to put pressure on them because the crowd is on our side. Now, the sixth one, and the one I see Christians tempted to use the most, is claiming divine authority. This is about using the phrase, "Well, God told me," in order to shut down disagreement. The phrase "God told me" can easily be used to silence input, gain compliance, or justify sin. And I think that's precisely the kind of spiritual manipulation Jesus is warning against. Now, this manipulation tactic is tricky because what if it's not manipulation? What if you really have heard from God? And I totally believe God can and does speak to us, so don't mishear me. But I think Jesus wants us to be hyper vigilant and aware of how we bring God into our dealings, our desires, and our discussions. In the Sermon on the Mount, it appears that Jesus wants us to cultivate a hyper self-awareness that we're not beyond manipulating other people by trying to use God's reputation or other fancy words. And so it's something we all need to keep on our radar. In fact, Jesus' teaching on oath making ends with a very sobering warning. He says, all you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. That's right. Jesus says that manipulating others puts us in alignment with Satan. Now, is this simply another time where Jesus is using hyperbole to make a point? I don't think so. I think Jesus is actually making a clear delineation. He's not just condemning bad behavior, he's pointing us towards a better way of being human, a way that reflects God's integrity and builds real community. And to be clear, Jesus isn't saying you'll end up with Satan one day, although that may also be true. He's saying when you manipulate others, you're actively playing the role of Satan in the world today. In a world where spin, half-truths, and clever loopholes are everywhere, Jesus invites us into a deeper kind of integrity. He invites us to be the kind of people whose promises don't need polishing. Why? Because in the kingdom of God, your word should be enough. And in the kingdom of God, people are held with such high value that you can't just use them as tools to achieve your purposes. Well, friends, thanks for listening. Enjoy jumping into discussion questions. I'll see you next time.